This is Greg Collins, Substitute Teachers Lounge podcast. Last week we talked about troublemaker Alfred. This week it's straight A Trish, who's a grade A pest. And I might even tell you about a book I just published for substitute teachers. Buckle up.
Substitute Teachers Lounge.
All right, first of all, for those of you disappointed in me because I used the word pest, sorry about that. That's probably kind of strong, but it just happened to fit that sentence. You know what I mean? So we'll get to that here in just a moment. I will also tell you that at the end of the podcast, I will tell you about that new book I just self-published through Amazon. It is available now, and I'll provide all the links to that book in the show notes, but I'll talk a little bit more about it later after the main part of the podcast. I wanted to mention one other thing that somebody pointed out to me. Last week, first of all, was a very popular episode. In fact, I've noticed through my Buzzsprout statistics that we're trending back up. The number of subscribers that I lost when the pandemic break first started has now risen back up. You know, I was expecting it to stay down all summer until we went back to school, but it's actually going back up and it's almost back to where it was. So, and that's only been in the last 3 or 4 weeks. So I appreciate that. So thanks so much for that. I'm glad you're enjoying the podcast. If you enjoy the podcast, you'll enjoy the book, and I'll talk about that here in a moment. But the disclaimer that I gave you last week at the end, I want to put at the beginning this time in case, some people will listen to the main part of the podcast and maybe tune out after that. So in case you missed the disclaimer, over the next 4 or 5 weeks until we get back to school, I'm doing the true student stories. Every story is true. Here's what I'm doing to protect their privacy. I am allowing, I guess Google is the source I use. They have a random name generator. So I randomize a name, so any names that you hear while I'm talking are fictitious. The story is true, but the name is not, to protect that student's personal life. And I will also tell you that if the random name generator gives me a girl's name and I'm actually talking about a boy in actuality, I'm going to stick with that girl's name because I think that's the best way to keep things as private as possible, keep you guessing, so to speak. So there's the disclaimer. Now, let's get on to Trish. In my way of thinking, there's, you could kind of group, I hate to group the kids, that, but you can kind of group the type of disciplinary issues you have into 3 groups. You've got somebody maybe like Alfred that tends to give you trouble quite often. You've got some that are really good students that never, ever give you any trouble at all. And then you've got somebody like Trish, who is absolutely a smart, straight A student. In her case, she's actually athletic. I would say that her kids, her peers, consider her attractive. They want to be her friend. But yet, she uses her personality and her success as maybe a way to be a pest in class. So we're going from Alfred, who is a consistent troublemaker and struggles with grades, even though he's smart, to Trish this week, who is a straight A student, very conscientious about it. Now, I know you all hate the phrase that maybe it comes easy for her. I'm not sure if that's ever totally valid, but in her case, she seems like she has no trouble with classes. And to be honest, maybe that's part of the issue. I have noticed that sometimes when I'm teaching students, the ones who tend to get their work done quickly, if you don't give them something else to do, well, they do various different things. Some of them read on their own. Some of them ask for additional work. And some of them, not maybe to Trish's level, but some of them become distractors in the class. I called Trish a pest. I would also consider her a student that I enjoyed teaching. And she was actually very easy to talk to, but yet she presented, I would even say to the point that she took advantage of me. I've used that phrase in my class sometimes when I'm teaching others that they might be doing something they shouldn't. Nothing terrible, but I'll say, are you taking advantage of me because I'm nice? And I've actually had some students say, yes, Mr. Collins, we're sorry, we'll go back to what we're supposed to be doing. Trish, I'm not sure, would very often go back to what she was supposed to be doing. She made good grades. She knew it. She was smart. She knew it. Was she more important than the other kids? Of course not. But did she think she was more important than the other kids? Now, I know we try our best to treat all the kids equally, from the ones that give us absolutely no trouble to the ones that give us all kinds of the trouble, and then the majority of students that fall somewhere in between. We still, it's hard not to play favorites, but we still get caught up in that sometimes. Trish is a very unique situation, and I know you've all had this same student. Excellent grade student, very distracting to the other students. Here's the type of thing she would say based on her grades. She would, if I was teaching her, if I happened to be, I taught her several times across all the disciplines. And if I'll go ahead and tell you this was, well, no, I'm not going to tell you the school because I don't want that to be any more specific than it needs to be. But I will tell you that not only was she intelligent, but she would, quasi brag about it. In other words, she was the student that I might write a math problem up on the board, and she would say, oh man, that's easy. Now, I've had a lot of students do that, and a lot of times I'll wait a couple of minutes, then I'll walk over and say, listen, I'm glad this comes easy to you. Keep in mind that when you make a comment like that, it's kind of intimidating to the other students for which it does not come as easy. And most of them understand that, and they say, all right, Mr. Collins, I won't say that anymore. Trish wouldn't do that. She enjoyed the fact that problems came easy to her. She would brag about, indirectly about how much smarter she was than some of the other kids in the class. She wasn't dangerous at all. She was distracting. In addition to being distracting about her grades, she would be distracting for other reasons. Now, for some reason, the teachers had put her in the front of the room most of the time. And I know it seems like she would, of course, this was the winter time. She would wear some kind of shirt that she could easily pull up over her head, stretch it over her head, just to get the laughs of her classmates. So you can imagine how distracting that was when this teacher or this substitute teacher was trying to teach her something, because then we have to deal with that. If the rest of the class is laughing, it's difficult to deal with because they think it's funny. They think you might be the big ogre if you tell her to stop. But of course, what that really means is she already understands what we're talking about. She's using that time just to distract the other students. So those types of things is what I would get from Trish. Even simple things like playing around when you're sharpening your pencil, doing your work and then waving your paper over your head. Those were the types of things that I would get out of Trish, and that I realized that I was going to have to deal with her in a different way than I deal with other A students, other more average students. You want it to be equal to everybody. I had to be careful that I didn't demotivate her, but yet I wanted to make sure she didn't demotivate the other students. So that was the kind of student Trish was. I mentioned she was both athletic and probably, I guess, popular, you could say, with her classmates. So that created a little issue too, because anything that I would say to her, that the other kids would find out about. And I'll be honest, the more I taught Trish, the more I began to think, okay, are the kids okay with that, the way she acts, or is this something that if I figure out a way to correct it and make Trish behave better, will they, her fellow students, will they like that? So that's where I wanted to try and make some progress. Two of the stronger things that she did, I would catch her at times when we were doing computer work. She would get her work finished and walk around and maybe shut off other students' computers. In fact, I will even say the ones she tended to do that with are the ones that she knew that she was one of the highest grade students in the class, and she would do that to others that I guess she considered her competition. They were other students that just happened to be maybe getting the same grades as her. I think she had a desire to have the highest overall percentage grade in class, the highest overall A, and maybe that came from that. But she also wanted to just get attention in that way and indirectly let everybody know that she's finished with her work, so she's free to just do anything she wants to. The other thing that I thought was a little harsher than some of the mild things that she did is we were doing a Kahoot competition one time. She evidently felt like she was too good for that. She didn't participate. I didn't actually realize that she wasn't participate, so obviously that's my fault. But I noticed we had one student in there who just ran away with the score, and I was really praising her at the end of having such a high score, and then Trish made a comment that she would have gotten the high score if she actually participated. And a couple of other students kind of jumped on Trish a little bit for that and took up for the student that made the highest score that day. That same student, the one that made the highest score, she's the same type of student that could play Kahoot with one hand and read a book with the other. It just amazes me. I cannot read a book if there's a lot of talking. Now, I can read a book if there's noise, like muffled noise in an airport where everybody's talking at the same time. I often will put instrumental music in my ears when I'm reading. That goes well for me. But now you've got the whole situation with Trish. And here I am knowing that I am going to teach her enough. I am going to make sure that she doesn't detract from the others. I've got an issue to deal with, completely different from the way I had to deal with Alfred last week, but she was sort of a troublemaker herself. She was a troublemaker a little bit because of how successful she had been in class and how quickly she could get her work done. So, first thing I tried was to try to pump her up a little bit and maybe get her to use her success in a positive way, hoping that she would get the feeling that I thought she was important, which I did, just like I thought all the students were important, but that Trish would adapt to helping me out. And here's what I had her do. I told her in private, or, as private as you can be in a classroom, listen, since all this work comes easy for you, I would like for you to kind of walk around the classroom when you get your work finished and help others. My thinking was maybe she could do that and it would make her overcome her ability to aggravate people. Maybe she could do that and find out how much fun it is to help each other instead of distract each other. So that's my first game plan, and I guess if I call that the first game plan, it didn't work. She would go around and help the others, but in my observation, as I would watch her help, listen to her help, she would get frustrated if the students didn't pick up on it as quickly as she would. And sometimes she wasn't very nice about it. She would say things like, "You should understand this now. I don't know what your problem is. I've told you this over and over." Well, obviously, I can't do that as a teacher, and I can't allow her to do that to someone else. So I had to come up with a good solution. Now, I hope you've listened to me to know enough to know that if there's any way to do it, to solve some issues in a way that gets the students themselves involved with solving it, I think it has a better effect. I could just go in and move her. I can move Trish to the back of the room and say no more. I think that would be risking taking kind of a demotivator again, and I certainly didn't want to do that. So I wanted to come up with a way to make her realize how she was affecting the class. And to be honest, I think she realized it, but she needed to be told in such a way that she could be helpful for the class instead of distracting for the class. So here's what I decided to do. There was various different things in the class I was teaching at this time. That I think I was teaching it 3 or 4 days in a row. And the first day I was teaching something, I didn't think it went over very well. So I told the kids, I said, "Hey, tomorrow I'm going to give you all a survey to fill out. It'll have some fun things on it. It'll have some serious things on it. It'll have some learning things on it. And I want you to complete it and give it back to me. I will tabulate it, and then we'll see if we can put some changes into place that will help you learn more quickly and give you a way to identify what you need to work on." And I didn't want to just make it this class, because then it really makes it obvious what I'm attempting to do. So I made it for every class. Yes, that was like 150 surveys. But, I could glance at them as I flipped through them real quick and determine what their answers were. And to be honest, while Trish was probably the most extreme example that I had of somebody that's distracting the other students, even though the classes came naturally to her and she was a straight A student, I had other milder versions of that situation in other classes. So I started out with the survey, things that I knew they would enjoy answering, like when you did well in class, maybe you went up to the board or you solved just an open class question that I asked everybody. What kind of candy would you like me to throw to you? If I think the class has done real well on something, how would you like to spend? How would you like the class to spend the last 5 minutes of that period? So some fun things. Then I would put things on there that was going to be helpful for me as far as teaching them. I would say, "I taught this topic yesterday. I think some of you struggled. Do you think going to perhaps a Khan Academy video would help you to understand it?" It's interesting on that question, by the way. Probably half and half. And it was by class. Half of the classes overwhelmingly wanted to see the Khan Academy video. Half of them did not. So I don't know what that says. And I tried to be adaptable to all the classrooms. So I would tell them things like that. I would tell them, and then I would have them, and this is the one it took me a while to tabulate. What do you think? What type of thing do you struggle most with in this class? And how do you think I could go about helping you with that? So that was the survey, except for the very last question. The last question said, "Are there any things or any student in this class that is distracting to you enough? I can't remember exactly how I worded it, but is distracting to you enough that it is seriously keeping you from learning what you should? And of course, even though all those questions were going to be important to me in different ways, the last one was the one I was going to spend most of my time on in the beginning. Now, there was a chance that was going to fall flat in my face, because if nobody said that student was distracting, if nobody said Trish was distracting, then I had to go about it a different way. I sure wasn't going to just say, Trish, you're distracting all the other students, if they said, they didn't say anything about her. But my suspicions held true, and in fact, as I flipped through that class, this last question, it was probably 90% of the students said this student was too distracting. Probably half actually mentioned Trish by name. The others would make comments, there's a student up in the front of the room that is being distracting every day in class, and I can't concentrate. So that's what we got from the survey. So then, you know that I am not going to go in there the next day after I looked at the survey and say, all right, Trish, everybody in this classroom thinks you're distracting, so you've got to change. That, of course, was not the way to handle that. I wanted to handle it in private. So I very pleasantly, after a class or in the hallway, I actually can't remember which one it was, I went up to Trish and said, listen, Trish, we took this survey yesterday. By far, most of the students in your class are saying they're having a difficult time learning because you're being distracting and that you look down on them in class. And, I don't know if she thought that the whole time she was doing her, quote, distracting stuff, that it was actually entertaining for the kids. But I could actually tell that she I could see some water coming to her eyes, and I didn't say anything else other than, and she didn't say anything, I said, do you think maybe you could work on that for us and see how it goes? And the next day was the telltale day. Trish came in, and she was a little bit quieter than I hoped she would be. I didn't want to completely demotivate her. But it only took 2 or 3 days till she was not being herself in the standpoint of distracting, but being herself as far as being friendly and helpful. So I could have just instructed her, Trish, you got to change. I could have said that in front of every classmate she had. Instead, I went this way with it. I think she appreciated me telling her that in private. I think once she got that ingrained in her head, she realized she could still be, quote, popular. She could still be kind of a jokester. Shoot, I was in class too when I was young. I think I might have even told her that I like to make people laugh in class too. But she went from being distracting to being helpful. She went to helping all the students learn. And I think I could tell by her expressions that she actually enjoyed it. And when she realized that she could help those students learn things, she actually took it upon herself to come up to me and brag about, hey, I think this other student on here finally understands. She sounds like she understands. And I said, Trish, I knew you had it in you. So sure enough, Trish and I became much closer, and she would then be one of those that would do anything that I needed her to do, even if it was like helping straighten up the room after class. So that helped me realize that I could help the situation by letting her see how it's affecting her classmates rather than me just being a big ogre again and coming in and treating her that way. So that taught me a lesson. It taught her a lesson, and both me and Trish grew from that. And I'll tell you now, when I substitute teach and I know Trish is going to be in the class, I look forward to that class now because I know how much she's going to help me. And yet, I also know how much she's going to make the class enjoyable because she's funny and the kids really like her and they don't think she's a distraction anymore. So, that's Trish, the straight A student who is no longer a grade A pest. Now, quickly before we get out of here, as I mentioned, I self-published a book. It is called The Substitute Teacher's Lounge Chronicles. It is available on Amazon in both Kindle and paperback form. And yes, I named it similar to the podcast because it is actually based on the podcast. I've had people tell me before that they wish they had something from the podcast that they could just read through because sometimes they don't get a chance to listen. So what I did, I had a service transcribe 10 or the more popular episodes, just, the earlier episodes, and then with a couple sprinkled in for more recently, like I included the one we did on going back to school in 2020, how we'd be affected by the pandemic. That's actually the last chapter in the book. So I had them transcribed. I went in and edited them. I did not want it to be like a stiff textbook. I still wanted it to be kind of jovial, so I only loosely edited it. You're going to see I want it to be more like the way I talk to you than the way I write to you. So I will include in the show notes. Right now, the Kindle version, I think they priced it at $4.69. The paperback is $6.99. I know if you're a Kindle Unlimited person, you can actually read it for free. And I think they'll actually let you download a sample for free. So I hope you look at that book. I certainly enjoyed writing it. If you ever want to write a book, man, and Kindle will let you for free publish it through Kindle Direct Publishing. So it was a lot of fun for me to do that. Remember, we have a Substitute Teachers Lounge Facebook page. It's what it's called, Substitute Teachers Lounge. You can get me at Twitter, at SubTeachLounge. My email is gregcollinssubstitute@gmail.com. I'll also tell you that I'm trying to become more active in my Instagram account. So Substitute Teachers Lounge is the name of that. I am also trying to do that. I'm also using the hashtag Substitute Teachers to try to get that going a little bit more strongly. So I hope you enjoyed today's true student stories. I want you to know some of the students I've been dealing with. I'll probably take it in a more positive direction the next week or so because I want you to know that there are plenty of those types of students out there too. But until then, have a good week. I hope we will all be substitute teaching again soon. Music provided by Ben Sound.